Welcome to the 2012 Fall Webinar Series, sponsored by the United States Department of Agriculture's People's Garden Initiative. For the next hour, you'll learn that growing native plants can be fun, challenging, and rewarding. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our technical facilitator, Jerry Schneider, and the rest of our virtual hosts at Kansas State University. I'm Annie Cicerini with USDA's People's Garden Initiative. Today's instructor is Tom Landis, a native plant nursery consultant and retired Forest Service employee. Tom retired in 2004 after almost 30 years of working with forest and native plant nurseries for the United States Department of Agriculture's Forest Service. He now consults on nursery, reforestation, and restoration projects involving trees, shrubs, and other native plants. He also is the principal author for Forest Nursery Notes and the Container Tree Nursery Manual. Tom is joining us from Medford, Oregon. Later in the program, Corey Rotter from Keep America Beautiful will share what her organization is doing to encourage the planting of native species across America. Participants can ask Tom and Corey questions via Twitter using hashtag AskPGI. I will be asking these questions at the end of the session. The title of today's presentation is Going Native. Tom, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you, Annie. Well, as Annie said, my name's Tom Landis, and I'm retired from the Forest Service, but I still work a lot with native plants. This is my first webinar, and the whole process is new to me, but I'm looking forward to seeing how well it goes. As Annie said, we'll have time for questions at the end, but if you're like me and would rather respond by email, my email address is there, nurseries@aol.com, so feel free to contact me. Well, okay, to start with, what is a native plant? There are a lot of definitions, but I think this one is the best for restoration purposes. Native refers to a plant species existing in America when the European settlers arrived, and it implies sustainability. That last phrase, implies sustainability, is an important concept because our objective in restoration is to create a plant community that will grow, thrive, produce seeds, and perpetuate itself without human intervention. The photo you see on the lower left is of a shrubby cinquefoil, which is a native plant found throughout the western states. Note the plant label that says Sutter's Gold, which means that this is a native plant cultivar. The term cultivar is short for cultivated variety. Native plant cultivars are selected for their flower size or color, but are not selected for their ability to grow and survive on harsh outplanting sites. And as you'll see, that's very important. Well, there are two major uses for native plants. Wildland restoration, which we'll be talking about today, but they're also popular for ornamental landscaping, which we won't cover. But if you're interested, magazines like American Nurseryman, which you'll see there in the lower right, have many articles on how native plants are used in landscaping. The photo at the upper left was taken by a friend of mine, David Steinfeld, at one of his roadside restoration projects here in eastern Oregon. And you can see that even on restoration sites, native plants can be very attractive. Much of what I'll be talking about today is taken from our book, Raising Native Plants at Home, which was published earlier this year by the U.S. Forest Service. Note the publication number at the top, GTR 274. If you'll write the Rocky Mountain Station, and the email address is given there, you can get a free copy. They'll be glad to send you a free copy of this publication. Note that you can also download the Adobe PDF files from the website listed at the bottom of the screen there. Most of the information in the book and my remarks today come from 30-plus years of working for the USDA Forest Service. I graduated with a degree in forest ecology, and after college I became interested in nurseries and actually volunteered to work at the Forest Service nursery in Colorado. We grew mostly tree seedlings like ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, but we began to get inquiries about how to grow other native plants for restoration purposes. Very little was known about how to grow these natives, so we mostly learned by trial and error. The old photo you see in the upper left was taken in the early 1900s at the Wind River Nursery, the Forest Service Wind River Nursery in Washington State, which was established to restore burned over lands. In the years since then, the Forest Service has gone away from just growing commercial conifers to growing all types of native forbs, shrubs, trees, and grasses. And the photo at the lower right is of a native plant called streambank wild hollyhock in a burned over area in Montana. Another beautiful native plant scene. Today there's tremendous interest in growing and outplanting native plants, and that's why we decided to write our book. The Forest Service and other government agencies, such as the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the Natural Resources Conservation Service, all have important native plant programs, and we all work together. You can get more information about any of these programs by going to their websites and searching for native plants. Okay, let's say you have a project where you want to restore native plants on your particular area. The first question is, what plants are native in your area? Which plants originally grew there? Unfortunately, most disturbed lands are run over by weeds and may not have any of the original native plants present. So, what restoration ecologists do is go to an undisturbed area close by, which we call a reference site, and survey which native plants are found there naturally. Well, most of us aren't trained botanists, so we're going to need some help in identifying these plants. If you'll go to your local library or nature shop, you should be able to find some books that will help you identify the local native plants. For example, I found this book on the left, Flowers of the Table Rocks, which is right near Medford, Oregon here, at a local bookshop, and it has excellent color photos of all the plants in the area. In the upper right there, you can see photos of the flowers of one of the natives. So the flower characteristics are useful in identifying which species that is. And also, in the lower picture there, it shows you, if you're interested in collecting seeds for your restoration area, it shows you what type of fruit that particular native plant develops. In this case, it's a capsule, which you can see there, a woody or a papery capsule, and inside you can see the black seeds for that species. So books like this are just invaluable in helping you identify which plants you're going to want to establish on your area and maybe collecting seeds for those plants. Another great source of information on native plants is called the Plants Database. As you can see in the upper left-hand corner there, it's from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources Conservation Service. And the website for the Plants Database is at the bottom there. Pretty easy to remember. Excuse me. At the red arrow there, I've indicated a hot link, if you've signed on to this site, that will take you to a list of native plants in your state. So you can click on that, and it'll actually generate a list of native plants found in your state. Pretty handy. And up in the search box up there on the left, if you enter the common or scientific name of a plant, this website will give you a wealth of information about that particular species. And as you can see in the bar on the right there, there's also a lot of other helpful information available on the plant's website. And it's a website that I use almost daily, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so let's talk about the ways. If you've got a restoration site, you want to restore native plants, how could you possibly do that? Well, the first way is by sowing seeds. Generally with seeds, we're talking about either native grasses. In the upper left there, you can see seeds of some native grasses from here in Oregon, or forbs. And what forbs are non-woody plants that are not grasses, so a lot of flowering non-woody plants, such as you'll see in the seed production area there at one of our nurseries in the Midwest, where they actually sow the plants they want to develop seed from, allow them to grow and produce seed, and then actually harvest that seed and use that seed for restoration. So for most restoration projects, especially the small-scale projects that we'd be talking about, the seeds are either sown by hand, just scattered over the site, or they could be applied in hydromulch, which you'll see in the lower left there, also called hydroseeding. Hydroseeding, they mix up a mixture of ground-up paper pulp, seeds, and fertilizer, and then it's got a green coloring that you can see there, and they actually spray that on the site. So especially for larger restoration sites, that's the way they use, because the hydromulch actually insulates the seeds, keeps it moist, and helps it to get growing. In the table there, I've made a listing of some of the properties of seeds, how they're useful in restoration. Seeds are good to use because you can collect them ahead of time. They store very well. They can be stored for years. So I gave that a rating of high. And the cost of establishing the seeds on your site is relatively low. Hand seeding is easy to do, doesn't require any equipment, and even the hydromulching is relatively inexpensive. But in the bottom there, I have desired placement and spacing. I rate that as poor, especially for woody plants, because it's difficult to get the plants exactly where you might want them on the site. On the other hand, for grasses and forbs, those smaller seeds, hydroseeding or hand seeding can work well to get a uniform distribution. And we'll talk a little bit more about distribution of our seeds here in a little bit. Well, cuttings is the next way that we could establish native plants, and there's two types of cuttings. One are just unrooted cuttings, as you'll see there on the left, and you can see the dimensions of a typical, this would be like a willow or cottonwood cutting. You would go out and collect these directly from plants near your site. They're cut off, and the angled end at the bottom there helps you to stick them in the ground, so as the name implies, the unrooted cutting is installed on the site without any roots at all. It's just put in there, and it'll generate roots on its own. For other species, it's easier to take the cuttings back to the nursery and actually root them in a container. As we can say, we call that a rooted cutting. And for some species, such as this dogwood, that's an easier way to go. Cuttings are very popular for plants that go along streams or rivers, which we call riparian plants. Cottonwood, willows, dogwood, those sorts of species. So cuttings are very popular for that. As I mentioned, cuttings are popular for restoring riparian areas like this riverside in northeastern New Mexico. The photo on the left is of two willow trees that were started from large unrooted cuttings we call poles. So these are 6 to 8 feet long and are installed in the bank so that the bottom of the pole is in contact with the water table. Then they generate roots and establish there. And as you can see there, they're growing very well. These plants are several years old, and they've produced a lot of branches and foliage. And if you can notice at the bottom of those two trees, the boles or the trunks are surrounded by chicken wire fencing, and that's to keep beavers and other critters from chewing on them, which happens along streams. Especially beavers can be quite destructive. So as we'll talk about later, a lot of our plants, once we put them out, we have to protect them. And then back to our table then. So for cuttings for restoration purposes, the ability to store and hold them over is low. You can collect your cuttings in the winter. You can store them under refrigeration for weeks or even months, and use them either to root directly on the site or take to the nursery. So that's relatively easy to do. The cost of establishment I've rated as medium. It's not as cheap as direct seeding, but it's relatively inexpensive and easy to install them on your site. And as far as the desired placement and spacing goes, I've rated that as good because it's easy to put these plants exactly where we want them. In this case, right along the side of the river there, which as you can see is running full, probably at flood stage. And so these plants are putting the roots down and helping to stabilize that stream bank and prevent erosion. So they're rated good because we can put them exactly where we want them. Well, the third way of establishing native plants are nursery plants, and that's the category we're going to be spending most of the time on this morning. And being a nursery person, these are the stock types that I like to talk about the most. On the photo there, you'll see that there's a wide variety of plants available that you can grow in nurseries, from very small to relatively large. If we look to our rating system then, nursery plants, the ability to store and hold them over is medium, so once we grow our plants, they can either be stored at the nursery until you want them, or they can be stored for short periods on your project site without damage, and we'll talk about how to do that a little bit later. The cost of establishment is medium. A lot of it depends on the size of the stock you're dealing with. The smaller plants are definitely easier to get into the ground, whereas some of the larger stock types, like the ones there on the right, take a little more work and therefore expense. And the desired placement and spacing is good because, again, when we take these woody plants to the field, we can put them exactly where we want them, in any pattern we want them, any location we want them. So it gives us a lot of flexibility in planning our restoration site. Well, there are two major categories of nursery plants, and this is the first. We call them Bareroot seedlings. If you look at the photo on the left, this is a Bareroot seedling of ponderosa pine at a nursery here in Oregon. As you'll see, as the name implies, the plants are harvested without any soil around the roots, and that's where they get the name Bareroot. On the right there, we have a bed of Sambucus plants, native plants, elderberries. And so you can see that other species besides conifers can be grown in Bareroot beds. The challenge with Bareroot stock is when it's harvested from the field, the soil is shaken from the roots, and therefore you have to protect those tender roots until you're ready to get them back in the ground on your outplanting site. So Bareroot plants require special packaging. They generally are packaged in moisture-proof containers and stored under refrigeration until you're ready to use them. So they required special storage. And also, compared to the other category, container plants, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, there's more transplant shock, relatively more transplant shock. And by transplant shock, I mean what the stress that plant goes through in getting established on your project site. Well, the second category of nursery plants, and the one we'll spend most of the time on today, are called container plants. And they're by far the most popular for restoration projects. Well, container plants are grown in greenhouses or other specialized propagation areas in the nursery. And because of the ideal growing conditions there, they grow much quicker than Bareroot stock. You could grow the same species in half or 1/4 the amount of time even that it would take to grow in a Bareroot nursery. So that's one reason they're popular. Plants like the buffalo berry here on the left can be grown large enough to outplant in 1 year, and we'll talk a little bit more about crop production schedules later. And because the roots of the container plants are enclosed in growing media, we call that a plug. You can see on the photo of the spruce seedling on the right, the roots are protected in that growing media. When you handle them and when you ship them and when you outplant them, they experience a lot less stress and therefore a lot less transplant shock than Bareroot seedlings, and that's one of the main reasons they're more popular for restoration projects. The container plants are easier to handle, ship, and store, especially for smaller scale restoration projects, and they're definitely very much the best when working with volunteer planters who don't have a lot of experience with tree planting. So for the rest of this presentation, we'll be talking about container nursery stock. Well, this is one of the slides that didn't make it through, but the point of this slide is there are just many different, what we call stock types of container plants, which are named for the type and volume of the container they're grown in. They can be from as small as 10 cubic inches to all the way up to 5 to 15 gallons, and even in some cases ball and burlap, which you've probably seen at your local nursery, plants are used for specific purposes. Generally, for restoration projects, we prefer the larger volume containers, generally between 3/4 to 2 gallons in volume, are better for a lot of our harsh outplanting sites that we find on restoration projects. So if you're going to grow container plants, that's the volume that I would suggest. Of course, the larger the plant, the higher the cost, the more difficult it is to transplant and handle it, and the longer it will take to grow it in the nursery. Okay, where would I get native plants for my specific restoration projects? Well, the easiest way is just purchase them from a nursery. You might say, well, I don't have a native plant nursery in my neighborhood. Where would I find one? Well, as you can see there on the left, the Native Plants Journal is the leading publication for all aspects of dealing with native plants. And they produce 3 issues a year, and usually the summer issue, like this one here, contains an annual nursery directory. And you can access the Native Plants Journal online at the website given there. And in that directory, it's listed by state, so you can look up by which state. It'll give you a list of which nurseries in your state produce native plants, and then you can get the names of those, and then there's another index where you can look up the individual nursery, and it will tell you all the contact information, how to get a hold of them, what types of plants they grow. In a lot of cases, native plant nurseries also offer native seeds for your area, so if you don't want to collect seeds on your own, you could go to the nursery directory and find a seed dealer, someone who could provide the seeds that you'd want for your particular project. But when you work with a nursery, or if you call up a nursery, always try to grow your plants during the dormant season. And we'll talk quite a bit about dormancy. The concept of dormancy is very important in native plants. We'll talk more about that later. So generally we're talking about buy them during the winter when they're not actively growing. Always try and request local sources, and we'll talk more about seed sources too, but that means just getting seeds or getting varieties of that particular species that are adapted to your local conditions. Very important. And finally, the closer the nursery is to you, the better. You know, plants are living things, and shipping them through UPS or any type of transportation, any shipment, they're bound to go through some stress. So the closer the better. If you can go pick them up, that's ideal. But the less shipping they have to go through, the better quality they'll be. Long-distance shipping of live nursery stock produces many, many risks. Well, the second option on where to get native plants is to grow your own. As it says there, this is the best way to be sure of getting source-identified, locally adapted plants, because if you grow them in your local area, they'll be adapted to your local area. The other great thing is you can control the scheduling. You can grow the plants so that they're ready at the exact time when you're ready to outplant them. It gives you a lot of control over the situation. And it's also just fun. Growing I'm sure a lot of you are home gardeners, and growing native plants is not only challenging, but it's also very enjoyable. And We won't go much more into how to grow plants today just due to lack of time, but the majority of the book I told you about at the beginning there, Growing Native Plants, has all kinds of useful information on how to collect seeds, germinate them, how to handle cuttings, that sort of thing. Well, if you're wondering, if you've thought about trying to grow plants and you're wondering how you would do it, there's a lot of good help available out there. Like doing anything, you need a recipe, and we call those recipes propagation protocols. So what a protocol is, just a listing of how you would go about getting the seed, how you would process it, or cuttings, how you would get them to germinate, what type of fertilizer to use. So just a recipe for producing that particular plant. And you can find useful information on how to grow certain plants. And again, local nature books, the one I've listed there is Growing California Native Plants, and it's excellent. It not only helps you identify the plants, but it talks about how to collect seed, process the seed, and how to grow them. The other really good resource that's available online is called the Native Plant Network, and this is actually a database of propagation protocols, so it's a database of recipes for growing native plants, and it's available at the website there at the bottom. You just have to go in and either put the common or scientific name in, and it will list a variety of different ways people have grown that particular plant. And at the present time, we have 2,750 different protocols uploaded on that site. So very useful information. Well, crop scheduling, this is another illustration that didn't quite make the transfer. So I'll talk about it generally, but what a crop schedule is just like a chart or a graph that shows you how long it would take to grow that plant from the time you collect the seed and process the seed, get it ready to grow, or the nursery does, till when you can have it available for outplanting. And as it says there on the bottom, native plant crops are extremely variable in their growth rates. They can take it from as little as 3 months, whereas a lot of the native grasses grow very quickly, especially in containers, to as long as 3 to 4 years. One native plant that we are producing here in the western states is called bristlecone pine, and it grows very slowly, and it takes 4 years to get up to a 10 cubic inch size that's suitable for outplanting. So there's a lot of variation. A lot of the information on how long it would take to grow the plant you're interested in is available in the books or on the database I gave you, the Native Plant Network. Each one of those recipes, those propagation protocols, would tell you how long it would take to grow. The other thing useful about crop scheduling, whether you're growing plants or whether you're going to buy them from a nursery, is it tells you how long it would take to produce that particular plant and stock type. So if you want plants at a particular date for sowing on your project, you can count backwards, plan backwards from that project outplanting date from the protocols that you can see, the crop schedules that are given, and you can plan when you would have to get cuttings or seeds to your nursery to make sure that you could get those plants you need. And there's a good bit of information on crop scheduling in the book as well. One of the most important concepts, I mentioned it earlier, was seed source. The important thing in restoration is to get a local source. Native plant species grow over many states, like Douglas fir grows over, say, almost 15 to 20 different states in the West, and each local zone, the plants are adapted to that particular climate and soil. So we have what we call seed zones, and research has just shown us through years and years that you wouldn't want to take Douglas fir seed from Colorado and grow it in Oregon. It wouldn't do well. So you try to get seeds from your local area that's adapted to your climate and your soils. It's important if you're buying seeds from a seed dealer, always ask where the seeds were collected. They'll be familiar with the concept of seed zones. Tell them where you are and what you would like, that you would like seeds for that particular area. You can't just buy for a particular species. You also have to buy for a particular seed zone. Thought I'd just show you a couple of brief examples if you're thinking about collecting seeds on your own restoration site. This is chokecherry. that a lot of people use to make jelly here in the West. The fruits are in the upper left there, the blackberries. You take those back and you can clean them to get the pulp off. You can just mash them, of course, but if you have a large amount, you can process them in a wearing blender like that. The one thing you do, though, is we tape over the metal blades with electrician's tape just to dull them a little bit so they don't damage the seeds. So by adding water, you can mix the slurry, and what you end up with is cleaned chokecherry seeds, which you'll see there in the lower left. And then these seeds can be stored, either used immediately to grow plants, or they can be stored for years under refrigeration. Another example is Penstemon, which is that pretty purple flower there in the upper left. Well, Penstemon, again, this is a forb, and it produces what we call a capsule, which is in the upper right there, that woody-looking capsule, and that's what contains the seeds. So if you collected those capsules and you brought them back, crushed them up, say in a bag, what you need to, the next point thing you need to do is separate the seeds from all the chaff and leaves and all the other debris in there. And that's done by one of the most ancient horticultural or agricultural techniques in the world called winnowing. You just drop it in front of an electric fan, and the lighter material, the chaff we call it, blows off, or the empty seeds, the heavier seeds, the good seeds, fall down directly. Sometimes you might have to do that several times, and what you end up then is just with pure Penstemon seed, which you'll see there on the left along with the dime, just showing you how small they really are. And you can see this is one reason a lot of people don't like to do direct seeding with some of the native forbs. The seeds are so small, they're just hard to handle, so they prefer to grow plants and make sure that they're getting established on their site. Well, if you're buying plants from a nursery, you generally have to talk about specifications. Some people actually write contracts with native plant nurseries where they specify how tall they want the plant, what the stem diameter is. We call the stem diameter at the root collar there, we call, as you can see in the air, we call that caliper. And then also some specification of healthy root system. We usually talk about a firm root plug, so that the roots are holding the soil together and they're ready for outplanting. Sometimes you talk about a terminal bud or a dormant bud, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for just general purposes, the single thing you'd be interested in is that root collar diameter, stem diameter, caliper. That's the thing that's been shown to be most related to quality of outplanting on your site. Well, another concept that I've mentioned, and again it's really important, is dormancy and hardiness. They kind of go together. In the pictures here we see a dormant bud of ponderosa pine. You can see that the bud is well formed, it's resistant to stress, it's not actively growing. So when we talk about a dormant plant, we talk about a plant that's not in the active growth stage. The other nice thing about dormant plants, you'll see in the photo on the left of blue spruce, if you look closely at the needles, they have a bluish color. Well, that's actually a wax. That when the plant stops growing, it forms a bud, it gets ready for winter, it produces a wax that prevents water loss. So dormant plants are much more resistant to stress than actively growing plants. And as you'll see, that's very, very important when you're going to procure seeds, either whether you're growing them for your project or if you're going to buy them for a nursery. You want to get plants when they're dormant because they're much easier to handle. They resist all the various stresses much easier. Well, this is from our book, The Plant Dormancy Cycle. With conifers, they don't lose their needles, so it's not quite as easy to see when they're dormant. But for most of our deciduous plants, it's easy to see when the plants go dormant. So we start at the top there in the spring. Either the seeds germinate, or for existing plants, the buds break, they produce foliage. We'll go down there on the right. You get active growth through the summer. And then as the days get shorter, the nights get cooler, the leaf colors change, and eventually on the bottom there the leaves fall off. So with deciduous plants, it's really easy to see when they're going dormant. And they reach this maximum period of dormancy actually in late fall or early winter, as it shows there in the lower left. So that's when the plant is most resistant to stress, all the various stresses that would be involved in handling and outplanting. So as you go through the winter, as you go through cold temperatures, the dormancy actually decreases. So they're most dormant in the late fall, early winter, and as they're exposed to cold temperatures, we call that the chilling requirement, the plants lose that dormancy until by late winter, early spring, in the upper left there, the dormancy is actually low, and at that point, the plant is just ready to grow, and the only thing that's keeping it from growing is temperature. And so that's where we store our nursery stock, why most people store under refrigeration, because the plants are ready to grow. They're at low dormancy, but by keeping them under cool conditions and in the dark, they can be stored for months until you're ready to plant them. So concept of dormancy, very important, and we talk more about that in the book. One of the hazards of non-dormant nursery plant, I took this photo in southern Idaho. These were some ponderosa pine that were delivered for a project, and you can see all those curly tops. The buds of these ponderosa pine have already broken bud. The shoots have begun to grow. And as you can imagine, they're very susceptible to all types of injury, desiccation, mechanical injury. If you just tried to ship those, a lot of those tops would just fall off. They're that succulent. And maybe more important is that non-dormant plants, all of the energy from that plant is going into producing new foliage, and so there's no energy left for root growth. And so if you put a plant out that's already actively growing like this, all its energy is going to producing new foliage. It's not putting any energy into producing new roots, which is really what we want when we outplant a plant onto a harsh site. What we want is we don't want it to grow atop right away. We want the roots to grow out into the surrounding soil so they can access water and nutrients and get established. And after that, then we'd like to have the shoot begin to grow. So this is what you don't want, something you definitely don't want if you try and buy nursery stock. Well, the rest of the presentation, I was going to talk about care and handling of nursery plants from storage to outplanting. And I use a lot of concept in my training sessions, and one of these is just the chain of various events that go from when you harvest the plants at the nursery and they're stored at the nursery all the way to where you outplant on the light. And this is the old weakest link in the chain. Any one of these conditions or these steps in the process can induce damage, whether it's during the harvesting, storage at the nursery, whether you're handling and shipping them, whether you're storing them on site ready to outplant them, and actually to when you put them in the ground. The other thing to remember is that all these various stresses are cumulative, and that gets us to our next slide, which didn't come through, but what I'll describe to you is I use what I call a checkbook analogy. And when you get your plants at the nursery, they're at 100% quality. When they're ready to be picked up and they're in storage at the nursery, they're as good as they're ever going to be. And everything that happens to those plants after that point, whether it's in shipping, whether it's in handling, let's say the boxes were dropped when they're being handled, they're left out in the sun and allowed to dry out. Any of those stresses is like writing a check on that account. So if you can imagine a checkbook, you have a lot of different checks written that actually decrease the quality of that plant. So the thing to remember here is it says that all these stresses are negative and cumulative. They all add up. So if you have 5% loss here, 10% loss there, 5% loss there, the plant, when you get it and it gets to the outplanting site, it's, say, 70% of the quality it was when it was at the nursery. The other important thing to remember in this analogy is that there's no way to make a deposit. Plants, again, their peak of perfection, their peak of quality at the nursery. There's no treatment you can do to make them any better than that. Well, another chart that didn't come through, but basically it was just a list of the potential stresses from nursery stock, from the various harvests in the nursery to your outplanting, and it just listed things like temperature and desiccation, and those are our major concerns. The worst thing you can do to plants after you've taken them from the nursery and before you get them in the ground is allow them to dry out. So anything you can do to keep them moist, to keep them in the shade and keep them cool, that's the best way to store your plants until they're ready to to put out on the site. Well, here are a couple of pictures from planting projects in the Rocky Mountains. On the upper right there, these are some container plants that were delivered for a reforestation project, and they're stored just under some natural shade in the forest. The thing to notice here, though, is that they're not all in the shade. And the other thing is that the sun moves during the day. So in my training sessions, I tell them you really have to plan on, that later in the afternoon, all those plants might be sitting in the sun and drying out. So wherever you're storing plants on your site, make sure they're in the shade. In the lower left there, you can see there weren't that many trees around, so they actually created a type of shade house with a shade cloth on the top and the side, not only to prevent the sun from drying them out, but to prevent winds from getting in there. So always store your plants in the shade. A lot of cases, especially on restoration sites, you probably don't have any trees for shade, so a lot of times you're going to have to shade them artificially somehow. In the upper photo there, the upper right, there are all different types of tarps that are available from reforestation suppliers, that sort of thing. And as you'll see, a lot of them are coated with aluminum type material or a shiny material that is ideal. They're also, a lot of them are white, so they can reflect the sunlight and keep your plants cool and keep them from losing any moisture. The chart here on the left, you probably can't read it completely, but this was an actual test just in one day where they measured temperature, and the red line there in the middle is the actual temperature in the sun, the ambient temperature, and then they had different types of tarps where they covered seedlings and then had a thermometer in there and measured it. And the worst one, which is the dark green canvas on the top, so those green canvas tarps that you probably have in your garage or that you can get from the hardware store, those are the absolute worst things for storing and protecting seedlings. The best thing, like those commercially available tarps, Mylar is one of the materials they're made with. You can see between the Mylar tarp and the dark green canvas tarp, there could be over 40 degrees difference in temperature. So you could buy good plants from the nursery, and a couple of days of storing them poorly in the sun or under the wrong type of tarp could really decrease the quality. The other important thing to remember is to make sure that the root plug is wet. The roots are completely saturated and wet before outplanting. The upper picture there is of, again, a reforestation site in Colorado where we had a stock pond, and they actually built a pump, and so we could water them just to keep them wet until they could be outplanted. And there's been some good research done on that. The graph in the lower left there just shows various plug water content. So by the plug, we mean the root ball of the plant. And as you can see, the wetter it is, the better. Once it gets lower than, say, 55% water content, the mortality can increase considerably until at 5%, it's up to 60% of those plants would die. So the wetter you keep those plugs, the better. One thing you can do, a good treatment you can use before outplanting, is to use a root dip. And the photo there in the upper right are some reforestation seedlings being dipped in Terrasorb in a bucket with water, and it's a slurry, so you literally take the roots, dip them in there, it coats the roots, and it also hydrates the plant. And there are quite a few materials available if you looked up root dips on the internet. A lot of different products, and several of them, 3 of them there, are shown in this bar chart at the lower left, different root dip treatments. But this research study looked at just plain water, soaking the plants in water or dipping them in water, or in any one of these 3 commercial products. And as you can see, the blue bars are survival, the green bars are growth after outplanting. Actually, the water treatment did as good or better than any of the commercial treatments. But yeah, just dipping the roots or watering them before you outplant your plants is really good and something we recommend. Very often from nurseries, the plants have been kept in the container too long, and they look, the root ball looks like on the left there. We call them root bound. In other words, the roots have just grown all the way around. It almost looks like a woven basket. There's just, the roots are all just tightly bound together. And if you just planted that plant directly on your outplanting site, the roots wouldn't grow out in the soil because they're all wrapped around each other. So if they're that bad, it's generally better to somehow break that compaction up, that circling up. And what we recommend is just using a tile knife or any sharp implement like that, and just score the outside of the root plug and loosen the roots. What that will do is loosen them up so then they can grow in the out into the surrounding soil and start taking up water and nutrients. Another concept that's important is the outplanting window. The outplanting window basically is the ideal time to plant your plants. Generally, we talk about a winter time being best because temperatures are low. We use at least in the western U.S. and a lot of the U.S., we get most of our moisture in the winter, so the soils are wet. And just as you can see from this chart here, the outplanting performance, the red curve, survival, or the black curve, growth after outplanting, do better the earlier in that planting window you go. You can get out. And the planting window will vary a little bit depending on the local climate where you are, but generally you try and plant when the amount of atmospheric stress is low, it's not hot and windy, and the soil moisture is ideal. So you have to, one of the things you want to think about on your site is when's the best time to plant? When is the outplanting window? We talked about outplanting patterns earlier. A lot of them depend, there's things that affect them. There are three different ones. The uniform, where each plant is equally spaced from its neighbor. Then there's the random pattern, where plants are randomly placed on the site. And then there's a clumped random pattern, where there's clumps of plants and they're scattered around the site. And a lot depends on your project objectives and which species you're putting out. If you're just sowing grass seed, maybe the uniform's fine. You're just trying to get a uniform field of grasses or forbs. But if you're putting out trees, it's really good to try and, you wouldn't want them like a Christmas tree plantation. It wouldn't look natural. I call that the cornfield effect. You'd want them some sort of a natural pattern out in the field. And generally that's kind of the clumped random pattern. If you go out and look at plants on your reference site, you'll see they grow in clumps. Sometimes certain species grow alongside others. So those are the things you want to know and observe. So you'll know how to put those plants out there and make sure that the site looks like it would normally. Another term we use in forestry is called scalping. It reduces the weed competition and conserves moisture. In the upper right-hand corner, the guy is scalping with a tool just to remove any grass or debris from the site and give the plant, reduce the competition. And the lower left there, you can see that what scalping does by removing the grasses and forbs from around your planted seedling, it conserves soil moisture, and you get a better survival. Finally, outplanting tools and techniques. We'll go through these quickly. We're starting to run short on time, but a planting shovel shows here is one of the best all-over tool. If people ask me to recommend one tool, this is what I recommend. In that center picture there, you'll see planting shovels are actually reinforced, so they're specialized for that, but it's basically just a reinforced tile spade. Other planting implements, dibbles and planting bars, a lot of people like to use those because they're easy, but in clay soils, as it shows there in the illustration, they actually compress the soil around the planting hole, and that can cause problem with root growth. And there are specialized material or specialized implements called plug hose that are used for a lot of smaller plants. Power augers are really good, especially for crews, where you have one person making the hole and then the other person planting. Their augers are available in different sizes, so they'll fit different types of container stock, and it works really good for volunteers. You can have one person operating the auger, and the volunteers can go behind just planting the seedling and making sure the soil's compacted around that. And that's what this this illustrates is that the real important thing is to ensure good root to soil contact around your plants. Make sure they don't have any compaction. Finally, just a few do's and don'ts. The ideal seedling there on the left should be planted with the soil completely covering the plug. That may look a little deep, but remember that soil is going to compact after it gets wet. It's going to settle down. The thing we don't want is there in the middle where their plants are too shallow and the roots and the plug are exposed to the wind and sun. You don't want to plant them too deep. And on the right there, make sure they're vertical, so they would look normal. They won't end up growing crooked. You don't want any debris in the planting hole. You want to use just pure soil. And you want to make sure, again, that there are no air pockets surrounding the planting hole. You want to make sure that plug-to-root contact, plug-to-soil contact is perfect. And finally, there's a few things that you can do to post-outplanting care. These are listed in the book, so we won't go into a lot more detail here, but the important thing is to find out what's limiting on your site, whether usually, as we mentioned, it's water and heat, or cold temperatures. Temperature and moisture are the most important, so anything that you can do to reduce that. Drought's the number one stress. If all possible, I always advise people to water their plants. Not only does it hydrate the soil around the plant, but as it shows there on the left, it compacts the soil and actually settles soils around the root, ensuring that good soil-to-root contact. Tree shelters are used on a lot of sites, especially where there's animal damage, but not only do they protect the stem of the seedling from sun scald, which is very, very common, especially with young plants, but it protects from cattle, whatever type deer, whatever type of animals you have out there. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Annie.
Thanks, Tom. Corey Rotter, our presenter, is the manager of beautification and community greening with Keep America Beautiful. Keep America Beautiful is the nation's largest volunteer-based community action and education organization. This fall, Corey helped Keep America Beautiful launch National Planting Day, which is a nationwide initiative to plant and garden sustainably with native species. From September through November, people's gardens across the country were happy to join Keep America Beautiful in this effort. Corey, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you, Annie. Hello, everyone. As Annie said, my name is Corey, and I'm from Keep America Beautiful. We are the nation's leading nonprofit in bringing people together to create vibrant communities, which is why National Planting Day fits so well with us, benefiting the ecosystem and also beautifying neighborhoods and bringing people together to work and to have pride in their communities. Here's a little bit of information about Keep America Beautiful, but as Tom had said, we are a little short on time. So I will talk about National Planting Day, which was Keep America Beautiful's first program of this kind, and this was our first year holding it. It was a National Awareness Day encouraging all Americans to plant native species at their homes, in their backyards, as well as in their communities. We have an affiliate network of over 600, and we had about half of them participate in National Planting Day this year. And we had a phenomenal turnout and absolutely surpassed every goal that we had. We had a great event in Huntsville, Alabama, where our affiliate gave away 4,000 oak leaf hydrangeas in a little under an hour. They had a line wrapped around the block. People wanted these plants and wanted to put them in their backyards and in their communities. And as Annie said, People's Garden came on board. We had the USDA People's Garden Initiative as an official partner and had participants planting native species in their people's gardens as well as in their communities. We had such a phenomenal amount of planting happening. As you can see these numbers on the slide, 8,000 native trees Probably more. We still are currently wrapping up the results and getting all the numbers in. 10,000 native plants and shrubs, and actually the big number here is actually gone up and is at 20,200,000 native wildflowers and seeds were planted. We had a huge amount of seeds planted in Glendale, California. They did a wildflower planting along their medians and on some of their streetscapes and neighborhoods. It was quite the event. We had over 13,000 participants, which is incredible, from young children in pre-K to children who were to senior citizens. And the events took place from September 8th through November 30th, and as you heard Tom explain the importance of planting these native species during the colder months. And we did that to also allow for regional planting calendars. You're not going to plant at the same time in all the different parts of the country. And just to give you a glimpse into how widespread these events were, we were everywhere. We were in 36 states, and hopefully next year we can be in all 50. To have that push would be great to have especially the Pacific Northwest participation. Is definitely important to us, but we could not be more thankful to have had this drive behind planting native species and just have this huge impact. It was really phenomenal, and we're preparing for 2013. Cannot wait. It's going to be the same time frame, and hopefully we will have a few sponsors so that we can give away some grants and we can just have a bigger and better event and impact on the United States. And with that, I will turn it over back to Annie. But if you do have any questions, here's my contact information. And if you're interested in participating in National Planting Day or just learning more about what Keep America Beautiful does, here's my email address and phone number. Please don't hesitate to contact me directly. Thank you all so much for listening today.
Thanks, Corey. So we have several questions for both of you. Our first question comes to us from Twitter, where they're interested in finding out, particularly Tom, if you could share your book, the name of your book, and where people can connect with that, and also the other websites you listed during your PowerPoint slide. If you could go over those again.
Is there a way that we could bring those up on the screen? Maybe the easiest thing is just if they want to contact me at nurseries@aol.com, I'll make sure that they get the information on both those websites, how to order the growing native plants. I'm sure if you Google that up, that would work. But if you want to just contact me at nurseries@aol.com, I'll make sure you'll get a copy. And I'll also let you know about the other websites.
Can you name the book one more time?
It's called Growing Native Plants at Home. And it should come up if you just Google that title. And it was published by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Rocky Mountain Research Station.
Our next question is that you had mentioned that dogwoods, like willows, are amenable to unrooted cuttings. Does this apply to all dogwood species?
I would have to check. For the species that grow along the stream sides here in the west, yeah, it does. They seem to root very well from cuttings. For more of the upland species like red osier dogwood, which are what we consider riparian species that grow along streamside, that's primarily what I was talking about. The more tree-like dogwoods, those would be better grown from seed.
So are planting willows different than planting dogwoods? Same person.
Planting willows are actually much easier. Both willows and cottonwoods actually have root primordia under the bark, and that's why it works so well on the unrooted cuttings. So for most of your willows, if you harvest just the stems and stick them in a container if you want to root them, or if you want to put them alongside the stream, the main thing is to get them long enough so that the cutting gets down to the water table, where the permanent water table is. So sometimes along a stream side that wouldn't be too deep, but the further you get away from the stream or the pond, the deeper the hole would have to be.
Is there a more efficient way to propagate yews in large numbers?
Well, yews, I'd have to check my propagation protocol, but they have been produced from seed, but most people produce them from cuttings. And so yew is one of those species. If you took a piece of the foliage and if you used a rooting hormone, they root rather easily, and that's the way that most of them are produced, or are from cuttings using rooting hormones. On the website, the propagation protocol would describe, exactly how you do that. Or again, if you would write me at nurseries@AOL.com, I'll send you some information on that. But rooted cuttings is the way to go with yews.
Thank you. Thank you to Tom, to Corey, and to everyone who participated in the third session of the People's Garden Fall Webinar Series. This session will be posted online for anytime viewing after closed captioning is complete. If you have questions about this series, you can email peoplesgarden@usda.gov. Join us again next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time for our next webinar focused on making and using compost.